Evening all. Well, this is the next installment of the Millennials Guide 2, and in this one I'm covering the Flashman novels by George MacDonald Fraser. I think these are a fantastic read. I thoroughly recommend them to anyone. Well, the reason why I'm doing this is that I recently read an article on the Mises Institute website which talked about how good the novels were, but there was a danger that they're starting to fall out of the public consciousness. For a while, they were extremely popular. During George MacDonald Fraser's lifetime, but since his death, they've kind of rapidly fallen out of the public consciousness, which is sad because there are 12 novels in all, and they're all a cracking read, very entertaining. I'll talk about each one in turn, but I want to start by describing the central premise. So Fraser didn't create the character of Flashman. That was Thomas Hughes, a Victorian novelist who in 1857 wrote Tom Brown's School Days. And Flashman was the school bully. He was a supporting character in that, and he was a school bully. And he was terribly beastly, and a coward, and a bully, and a scoundrel. And what Fraser did was take that character and imagine what his life was like after being expelled from rugby school. And Flashman is all the things. He doesn't learn from his experiences, pardon me, at school. He is still a bully, a coward, and a scoundrel, and a cad and a bounder. But as an adult man, add womanizer as well, and cheat. So what happens is that Fraser's recounting his life as a series of a fictitious memoir, where Flashman is in his 80s, approaching the end of his life, and he's writing an honest account of his life. Because here's the thing, Flashman gets involved in practically every major event from the late 1830s through to about 1900. Every major event that happened, every war, political scandal, you name it, and Flashman is somehow roped into it, very much against his will. Flashman wants a kind of nice, easy life. He doesn't get it. Instead, he is mistaken constantly for being a hero due to sets of circumstances. Things go wrong. He desperately tries to get out of these situations because he's a coward, but somehow he gets roped in even deeper, and he usually ends up smelling of roses. Now, this is a good thing because he's bestowed with lots of accolades and medals and a knighthood even, but it works against him because people think he's a hero. They keep getting him involved in things. There's a quote in one of the books which says, "When all other trusts fail, turn to Flashman," and that's from Abraham Lincoln. So that's the central premise. This is the misadventures of a scoundrel and a bounder who is mistaken for being a hero. So there are things that make the Flashman novels an extremely good read. The first is the comic touch of it. As its central premise, the undeserving hero that, well, he's not a hero, he's an anti-hero, and he's quite undeserving of the rewards he gets, and he keeps getting into misadventures. So there's a good comic touch, and Flashman himself, it can be quite dry and witty, and the juxtaposition of this kind of snivelling coward and bully and the often the magnitude of the events he gets caught up in gives it a nice comic edge. They're also packed full of action as well. Flashman gets involved in a lot of wars, and he needs to escape from a lot of wars as well, and sometimes he's put in very real life and death situations, and you think, how is he going to get out of this? So there's a lot of action packed into the Flashman novels. But the third thing, and I think this is what gave it its huge fan following, is the level of historical detail. And Fraser meticulously researched each and every Flashman novel. The amount of real-life historical detail in them is superb, and a lot of real life people are involved in the novels. And Fraser was so good at weaving fictional characters and real characters and fictional incidents and real life incidents almost seamlessly. So you do have to double check to see what was real in each Flashman novel and which was invented for it. As I said, it's nearly seamless. And Fraser does this thing where one of the conceits is that Fraser isn't a novelist. He is merely the editor of the Flashman Papers. So he footnotes constantly throughout the novels. So Flashman will recount something, and there'll be a little footnote symbol, and you flick to the back of the book where you will read the real life incident. It's some real historical notes, and there are appendices as well where Fraser elaborates a bit more on the real life history contained within each novel. So it is a fantastic wealth of historical detail on the Victorian age. And the Flashman novels serve as a fantastic primer for that era. If you don't know much about the history of a particular incident in the Victorian age, start with a Flashman novel, and build up your knowledge from there. Because as historical primers for real incidents, they are fantastic. I mean, I've learned so much about that era from reading a Flashman novel and then going on to read other historical accounts. So thoroughly recommend it for that point of view alone. There are other things about the Flashman novels which I think make them good literature as well. There's a recurring theme about the clash between, say, the Western, you would call for its time, liberal mentality, and the old world, so the West and the East, or the Orient and the Occident, as it were. Flashman is a product of British Victorian society, and he's often thrust into, say, settings in Africa or Asia or the subcontinent, where he comes up against very ancient ideas and philosophies and morals. Even though Flashman doesn't have many morals himself, he is surrounded. As I said, he's a product of his upbringing to some extent, even though he's rejected a lot of the Victorian morals of the time. But he's often surrounded by people, diplomats, fellow army officers, their wives, and other people who get involved along the way. And they kind of typify the mentality of the era. And there's clashes with the princely Indian culture, or the Central Asian culture, or the African culture. I'll elaborate a bit more on that as I go through each novel in turn. And sometimes there's the one set in Europe. There's a clash between, say, the British Victorian mindset and, say, the German counterpart of the same time, or you get the thing in when Flashman travels to America. Again, the clash between the North mentality, the South, the Native American, the Hispanic, and the white settler mentality. It's all going on there, and it provides a rich seam for the conflict and exploring the history of the period as well. So without further ado, let's go through each novel in turn, and I'll summarize, without giving away any spoilers, what it's about. All right, here's the first one, published in 1969, Flashman, simply. And this is probably, I think this is the first edition paperback version. It was handed down to me from my parents. So there it is. Flashman is a bully, a liar, a womanizer, a coward, and irresistible. Now get used to this motif of the Indian beauty sort of clutching onto Flashman's leg. This is a motif that will reoccur a lot on the cover. So this one picks up events immediately after Flashman's expulsion from rugby school. And not knowing what to do with his life, he settles on. He's going to become an army officer. He asks his dad for the money to purchase into a fashionable cavalry regiment, preferably one that doesn't serve overseas. So he's posted the 11th Hussars, which is commanded by Lord Cardigan of the Charge of the Light Brigade fame. And they take an instant dislike to each other. Flashman realises he's in a world of toadies and fops, which he doesn't quite fit into. And so he's posted to Scotland, where he meets a beautiful but dim-witted young blonde girl, whose father happens to be a rich industrialist. He has an affair with her, but then when the father finds out, he's forced into a shotgun marriage with Elspeth, this beautiful young blonde lady, and he's saddled with a wife. Now, this is a bit scandalous, so he's packed off to Afghanistan, where he fights in the first Afghan war. And this is where the novel takes a kind of darker turn, because for the first half it's a kind of Victorian morality satire. And then he's sent to Afghanistan, where he's witnessing the events of the first Afghan war, which doesn't go well for Britain. And he's got to get himself out of that situation. And there's a lot of tragedy and shocking stuff that happens along the way. But at the end of it, this is the only spoiler I'll do, because it sets it up for the rest of the series, is that he is mistaken for a hero, and he's fated on his return to London. And that sets up the motif. He's the undeserving, accidental hero, even when he isn't. So that's the first one. Moving on. Next one is Royal Flash. And in this one, he's living it up in London in the aftermath of the first Afghan war. And whilst partying and gambling on boxing matches, he meets the famous actress and courtesan Lola Montez, who he has a brief affair with. But Montez is also a lover of Otto von Bismarck, who's just starting his political career. And Bismarck takes a dislike to Flashman, but notices that he could be quite useful. And he ropes Flashman into his scheme to solve the Schleswig-Holstein question. The novel it's one of my favourites. I think one of my favourites to read in terms of the comedy action side of things. Bismarck makes a good antagonist. But the plot is based on The Prisoner of Zenda, but instead of having a dashing Englishman as the main character, you've got this less than dashing, caddish character having to play out the same events as The Prisoner of Zenda. And it's the conceit is that Prisoner of Zenda stole the plot from Flashman. So that's the second one, Royal Flash. I really recommend that as an entertaining read. It was the only Flashman novel to be adapted into a film in 1975, starring Malcolm McDowell as Flashman. It's a good adaptation. Do check it out. So moving on is Flashman's Lady. I'm just going to hold that up there, because that, for me, is one of the best front covers of a novel, because that's Flashman's wife, Elspeth, right? And that's just gorgeous, isn't it? She's gorgeous. Yeah, they don't make them like that anymore. So anyway, Flashman's Lady follows on from Royal Flash. So we're still in the 1840s, and Flashman's in London, and he plays in a charity cricket match, but he doesn't realise that his opponent is a public school educated pirate who takes a liking for Elspeth, and who wouldn't, and he kidnaps her and takes her all the way off to Borneo. Now Flashman is expected to go and rescue his wife, because he's a Victorian hero, even though Flashman just goes, yeah, what do? You win some, you lose some. But no, he has to go and rescue his wife. So he goes all the way off to Borneo, and where he encounters James Brooke, the White Raja of Sarawak. And then the story moves on to Madagascar, where he becomes a sex slave of the woman described as the African Caligula, Queen Ranavalona, I believe her name is. And she's a real-life person. Oh, that's a cat's tail there. A real-life person who was vicious, cruel, said like Caligula. And Flashman's got to rescue his wife and get out of there alive. So that's another good, entertaining one. And it's nice because Elspeth has a bit more to do in the novels. She usually appears right at the beginning, and then you don't hear from her for the rest of the novel. So it's nice that she has a more central role to play. Then we've got Flashman and the Mountain of Light. So this is starting to take place in the mid to late 1840s. So in this one, Flashman is he goes straight from Madagascar back to the northwest frontier of India because he has local knowledge, and they think, well, that could prove useful. So in this one, he's got to protect a young Indian prince, a child, in a kind of the British are arbitrating these disputes between rival Maharathas for provinces, and so the British are trying to keep the peace and administer and take political advantage of the squabbles between Maharathas. So this young prince is targeted for kidnapping or murder. Flashman's got to protect him. But also, there's the Mountain of Light, which is the Koh-i-Noor diamond. I think it's the second largest diamond in the world. Could be wrong there. Please comment down below if I'm wrong. But it's in the Crown Jewels, the Koh-i-Noor. You can see it today. And this story it's a kind of fictionalized account of how Britain came to own that diamond and why it's in the Crown Jewels. So there you go. Tell about historical details. So now, here's another one I got from my parents, Flash for Freedom. You notice, right, with Raw Flash and Flash for Freedom, the title's slightly different from the others. That's because early on, Fraser wrote 1969 Flashman, then 1970 he wrote Raw Flash, and then this one 1971 Flash for Freedom. Notice that he didn't write them in chronological order, Fraser. He wrote them in whatever order he felt like. I'm just reviewing them in the historical chronological order. So they were called Flash, but then I think people started thinking maybe this is a little bit saucier than it actually is, and it downplays the history, and well, you can see on the cover here. So this is the early 70s. So downplaying the history and playing up the sexual aspect, and I think after a while Fraser just said no, it's going to be called Flashman and right, rather than try and work Flash into the title. So Flash for Freedom is set 1848 to 1849, and Flashman needs money, so he invests. He gets involved in a kind of trading company that runs from Britain to Africa to the United States. What he doesn't realise is that it's an illegal slave trading venture. So he effectively gets shanghaied and taken to against his will to the deep south of America in antebellum times, where he gets involved in the kind of the illegal underground slave railway network to try and get slaves up to the free north, and avoid sadistic plantation owners and try and get out with his life. And Flashman claims in this that he's the inspiration for Uncle Tom's Cabin with the Underground Railroad. So this starts. This is the first of the American series of novels, and they're almost like a series within a series, the one set in America, because events in this novel will have repercussions in future novels that are set in America. So this kicks that little mini series within the series off. Speaking of which, Flashman and the Redskins. Now this is a two-parter. The first half of the book's called The 49er, and the events follow immediately on from Flash for Freedom. So in this one, he's got away from the slave traders and he goes west, part of the 49er movement. He doesn't make it as far as California, but he has a lot of adventures along the way. involving Native Americans and the kind of move out west, Kit Carson, and the Mountain Men, and the kind of going into the wilderness of America outside of the civilized area. Again, the first half of the book carries on. Some characters from Flash for Freedom carry over into the first half of the book, and I'll get to the second half of the book later, which is set decades later, and the repercussions from the first half come into play. So, next, Flashman at the Charge. This is this is Flashman at the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War. So he gets sent to the Crimean War, and he desperately tries to get out, desperately tries to get a nice, cushy staff job. No such doing. He ends up in the charge of the Light Brigade, which has got some great comic touches. Is the fact that his bowels go just as the charge is starting, and his farting is so loud that it startles some of the horses in the Light Brigade, and they actually charge a bit faster. That's the first half. Second half of the book, he ends up getting captured and taken to a kind of a mini fiefdom within inside the Russian Empire on the Caspian Sea. And he's got to get himself out of a local dispute between the Russians and these Tartars, Central Asian tribesmen. So this is a really good one. It's a fan favourite, Flashman at the Charge. It's been adapted as a radio drama. So from that is I say it again, Flashman in the Great Game. So this is Flashman in the Indian Mutiny, and what's great about this one? This one is really dramatic. There's so much incident packed in it. It doesn't seem like a big book. It just packs incident after incident in there. This is a great one. If you want to learn a bit about the Indian Mutiny, start with this one and then, expand out. Read Christopher Hibbett's The Great Mutiny as a follow-up book. But this will give you so much information about the Indian Mutiny, the Siege of Cawnpore. It's one of the first Flashman novels really to deal with, I would say, atrocities. So it gets a bit darker in this one, but packed full of entertainment, action, and historical information. This is a must-read if you're going to delve into the Flashman series. Okay, just take a quick drink. Part 1 of this series, looking at the Flashman novels, and I'll put a link in the description below, and you can watch part 2 in a little bit. Okay, bye.